to be.
Hello. Good morning, everyone. I'm Gary Gonzer, the president of ESCOM. I want to welcome you this morning to a live online production with Marc Levine. The assemblyman from California, from Marin County, for 10 years. We often read about what California is doing in the legislature, and very seldom get a chance to talk to people in the know, the people who make it happen and make the news and keep our state going. So today is this chance. Let me welcome Marc Levine. He has served in the California State Assembly from 2012 to 2022, 10 years. And he'll talk to us today about his life in the legislature and his plans for moving forward. Marc is a longtime Marin resident and has worked on many tough bills that focus on transparencies in election and government. He confronted insurance and healthcare, and to provide better service to their customers, he stood up to oil companies and the NRA to protect our environment and safety. Marc Levine, will talk about his goals and achievements in the California legislature while answering questions from our ESCOM members, that's you, in the Spotlight presentation. This presentation promises to shed some valuable light on today's California legislature and let us know what Marc Levine is doing from here on. All right, Marc, the spotlight is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. It's good morning. I'm glad to be here with all of you, and thank you for joining me. I'd like to extend my gratitude to Gary Gonzer, Nancy Major, and Leonard Weingarten for this invitation, and Harvey Abernathy for his behind-the-scenes technical work to make this morning's Zoom happen. College of Marin is a fantastic place of learning, and I cheer on the success of the Emeritus College. I've been asked to reflect on my 10 years of public service in the State Assembly on behalf of nearly 500,000 constituents in the North Bay, including all of Marin County and the southern half of Sonoma County. We all know it's a beautiful place and it's filled with amazing people. It was my great fortune to marry my wife, Wendy, who was raised in Marin and guided us here as we looked for a place to call home as we set forth to live our lives together. I mentioned Sonoma County, and it reminds me to share with you what I'm doing now before going back in time to 2012. Just this month, I became the regional director for the Anti-Defamation League. ADL was founded in 1913 to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and secure justice and fair treatment to all. Just yesterday, I met with Sonoma County officials who are dealing with the hijacking of public meetings by bigots and racists who abuse both the allowed virtual participation in public meetings ushered in by the pandemic to pseudonymously spew hate and our cherished First Amendment. This is happening right here in Marin, just in our own Larkspur City Council meeting this week as well. And ADL is there to assist them. ADL has developed a toolkit to help public agencies deal with this trauma. I'm proud to be part of the oldest anti-hate organization in our country during this era of increasing hate crimes and violence against both racial and religious minorities. Now on to my reflections. The 10 years I served as your representative in the California State Assembly were years of remarkable growth and challenges. The North Bay's strength and resilience have shined brightly, and I consider it a gift to have represented this community. State revenues grew by $200 billion since 2012, and we've invested in our schools and communities, and we've brought universal health care to every Californian. We also paid down debt and judiciously banked over $25 billion in reserves so that this year's revenue dip and a potential recession can be weathered with minimal cuts to education and services we care so deeply about, including wildfire prevention. Those 10 years went by fast. During that time, I authored 95 laws to improve the lives of Californians. I focused on important issues including mental health, compassionate immigration policy, gun violence prevention, and insurance reform. Dedicating these years to public service and to California have been such an honor. I am extraordinarily thankful to our North Bay community members who have been partners with me every step of the way. It is often said that our service in the state assembly is an honor of a lifetime. Those 10 years were pretty wild, and Wendy and I checked in frequently about whether running for office and serving during challenging times was best for our family, whether it was worth it. And she was always there to support the decision we made together. But she'd be candid with you and tell you, just as I will, we are both ready for a different life. Serving in the legislature is hard, especially if you do it right. And I know those 10 years were well spent. In baseball, there is a term called wins above replacement. Essentially, WAR measures if a team wins more with a specific player in a position rather than a generic average player in that position. And that was the value proposition I posed to voters in 2012. I knew the community best, so I'd represent it best. And despite millions spent against me by my opponent, and for those who recall, back to 2012, I was outspent by 5-1. I prevailed, and I never changed my stripes, and perhaps never lost a little bit of that chip on my shoulder. If I had an opinion, I was never shy to share it. I preferred to introduce bills that I wanted to wake up and fight for, rather than sponsored legislation with lobbyists doing all the work. There is no doubt going against the grain made things more challenging for my staff and me. And sometimes my staff would tell me there was an easier or perhaps more convenient path, and I didn't always listen to them. But my style has always been successful. I've sent over 100 bills to governors, and sure, I've had more than a dozen vetoed, but it brings me back to wins above replacement. Could someone else have done the job I did, or did I serve my community uniquely? Could some other generic assembly member achieve the same result? I fought hard for my constituents, passed difficult bills, raised tough issues, and people noticed. While the 2022 election for insurance commissioner did not go the way I had hoped, the endorsement sweep of every major newspaper in California do give me hope. If you like them or need them, it's nice to get those endorsements. Those endorsements were validation that my style of politics is damn good, and we need more of it. I never melted away or sought safety in the herd in a moment of crisis. COVID in our prisons, gun violence, holding PG&E accountable, the insurance crisis, challenging the status quo or the sacred cow of incumbency, sacrificing a term in the assembly to give voice to those losing their insurance policies or their homes because they can't pay rising premiums. I never faltered to use the gift of elected office to help Californians. For me, it comes back to wins above replacement, to make the most of the time you gave me to serve our community in the legislature. This is the question that I asked myself. How am I any better or more effective than any other politician that can win an election in Marin? And perhaps that's the question we all should be asking, both candidates and incumbents seeking our votes in the future. Thank you. The floor is now yours to ask some Q&A. I look forward to some lively conversation and your questions. Again, it's just an honor to have represented our community, to be entrusted in that duty by you, and to continue, of course, to live here in Greenbrae. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. I got a couple of questions showing up here.
Okay, thank you, Mark. This is Gary again. I'm have a couple of questions that were asked before the production, and I have checked some off that I want to ask you. If anyone, by the way, has a question of Mark, please feel free to put it into the chat, and we'll look at it and ask Mark. He's watching the chat too, but we don't want him to focus on that. We'll do that for him.
Yes,
Okay.
and we'll also, just to let you know, if you raise your hand, we'll also go through that from the list there too.
Good. And for everybody's knowledge, if you raise your hand on the computer, it brings you to the front of the queue and we'll see your hand. Okay. First off, Mark, what is happening with fire coverage to homeowners now in Marin County specifically? I've heard a lot of people are being canceled because of fire issues, and maybe water issues are important too with the recent floods. Could you address that?
So that's a big question. So let me try to narrow them down, and so I appreciate it. So when I ran for insurance commissioner, I was really motivated at that time because I was hearing from constituents that they were being canceled, or their policies were not going to be renewed, and that also, of course, rising rates. Also, people who wanted to buy a home here, but across California, but could not secure insurance, which is required for a mortgage. And so I started looking into that issue, started introducing legislation to find a fix. My first entry point really into homeowners insurance issues was after the 2017 fires, and I had 3 insurance reforms that passed the legislature and were signed into law by then Governor Brown. I think, yeah, it was still Governor Brown at that time. Well, it might be fuzzy. Yeah, I think it was still Governor Brown. So forgive my memory. And so as I was trying to fix this, I realized that the insurance commissioner wasn't really paying attention, and that his attention was really misguided. He had made pledges about not accepting insurance donations, but then did actually went back on that promise twice. Some other interesting things that I felt that he was not taking the issue seriously, and that's why I ran. And I proposed a number of things, including some emergency regulations, also challenging the commissioner's office to say, look, if you're going to allow increases, Californians need to get something in exchange, which is expanded coverage. So nothing has been done until yesterday. So I started raising these issues in 2021. It's late 2023. Governor Newsom issued an executive order requesting the insurance commissioner to implement emergency regulations. This was coordinated. The insurance commissioner then responded with his proposals, and many of them do support what I've been asking them to do for 2 years, 2+ years, because of the legislation that I had introduced. It's somewhat problematic because I can't really see the weeds of those proposals from the position that I'm in. No one can. The public cannot. So, for example, what are the trade-offs? So if we're allowing the insurance industry to use formulas to determine how to expand coverage, what are those formulas? If there are algorithms to measure fire risk, what are those algorithms? It's proprietary. And I think the commissioner and even the public should be able to see what those algorithms are to understand why or why not people are getting coverage. I understand the trade-off. You can increase rates in exchange for covering more Californians. And I imagine that was going to be one of those trade-offs, but the devil's always in the details.
Right.
Good. Thank you, Mark. Okay. Just to let you know, a lot of people that ask questions didn't ask questions. They just said, thank you for serving.
Well, that's very kind. Thank you. Thank you.
It's not often you see a transparent servant of our people doing the work that they're voted in to do. And they all appreciated that. All right.
Thank you.
Solar is becoming an issue now. It used to be easy to do, and it's become harder. Can you address some of the increased obstacles and what is being done to help homeowners get solar panels.
Yeah, solar is fantastic for a whole lot of reasons, and I don't think I need to elaborate too much on the environmental reasons. I think there's some practical reasons why it's so important. Having distributed energy secures our access to energy, and as we've known, PG&E has either shut off our power preemptively because they don't trust its own infrastructure from fires, or strains on the grid have impacted our ability to get energy as we need it on demand reliably. This is a terrible risk to people who rely on energy for medical purposes or for cooling, which is also a health-related issue. And so we should do everything we can to allow for distributed solar and distributed energy generation in California to take pressure off the grid and ensure reliability. The problem is, of course, that undermines PG&E's profit. And so as people moved to solar, they didn't require the energy off the grid that PG&E had contracted for. Of course, delivery fees, which regardless of whether you have MCE or PG&E, the delivery fees still go to PG&E. PG&E is responsible, sadly, for the infrastructure. And they've been woeful in taking up that responsibility in a serious manner. So that is the challenge, is that PG&E and other investor-owned utilities have been seeking to chisel away at solar to protect those profits. And it's sadly, they have extraordinary sway at the PUC, the Public Utilities Commission, as well as the legislature. I voted against both of the PG&E bailouts in 2018 and 2019. And I was the only lawmaker to actually speak out on the floor against both of them. I was one of only 2 lawmakers that voted against both of them. And I talked about safety in the herd. A lot of lawmakers, this is one way I share with people. There's a bill, and then there's the analysis of the bill. The analysis isn't always perfect, so sometimes you have to go to the source. But even if you just read the analysis, you're already smarter than almost everyone in the room, or more informed. But we've got hundreds, if not thousands, of bills to look at, and these are very difficult, complex issues for people that don't have a background in this. And so it's very easy for a lawmaker to find safety in the herd and go along with what a governor or whatever those powerful interests might be, and vote for the compromise. It's a compromise. Compromises are good. Can't let perfect be the enemy of the good. I mean, all of these cliches that make it very easy for people to do the convenient thing. And when I talked about not always following what my own staff had recommended, I mean, that would be an example of it. I remember when I voted against the first PG&E bailout, SB 901 by Bill Dodd. He's a senator from Napa. I was so nervous about it. The deal was the deal. My staff said, take the deal. And I just thought, we're not safer with this. And ratepayers are not safer with this. Shareholders were being protected. And I remember how I felt when I spoke against it on the floor. I'd been a lawmaker for many years by then. But just to break away and voice, give it a different voice on the floor that, quite frankly, particularly as a Democrat, it is very threatening to your colleagues when you don't even vote for their bill, let alone vote no. A lot of people abstain, which is like voting no. Most voters don't really understand that. That thinks you're not doing your job, but it is essentially a polite way to say no. Pressing the red button is extraordinarily like poking a bear in the eye to your colleagues. And then if you actually speak against a Democratic colleague's bill, it is like war. They hate you, and then they want to kill all your bills, especially when you call out the problems, the actual, if you just disagree, that's fine, whatever. But if you really call out why the bill is so bad, you are dead to them, because you show their own vulnerability in taking a bad deal, whatever those vulnerabilities may be. And so, I never had a good relationship with Bill Dodd after that. And he would go on the radio and say, I didn't read the bill. That's how threatened he was. He was trying to say that I didn't understand it. And so just to give you some insight into how that plays itself out over time, And so then when the second bill came up, and PG&E had repeated its woeful mismanagement and again engaged in felony manslaughter for the campfires, I just said, there's no way I am going to condone another bill that helps PG&E continue. And so I had no problem whatsoever in voting no. But what I was surprised was that after the second time, I was the only one to speak against it. And so were we just talking about? Yeah, I'm sorry. I think I answered that question a little too long. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah.
You gave us a lot of background on that, which is
I'm giving you a little insight that
that's
most
right,
people don't
important.
get. Yeah.
You know, this goes in my mind, and I'm just me, it goes to the heart of what happened to negotiation, what happened to discussion that makes a difference in the compromise that you talked about. It's really important.
Yeah.
And
sometimes you can't take that negotiated compromise. It's just that bad a deal.
Okay. The cost of gasoline at the pump is going way up. And I know you expect this, but here it is. What is causing, you look at the nationwide average, which is what, 380, something like that. And now the gas is something like almost over 6 for premium in many areas. How do you recognize that? How do you explain it?
I mean, let's just acknowledge that things are expensive in California, first of all.
Okay.
There is a mystery surcharge that observers of the petroleum marketplace have identified in California, that when there was easing of oil prices and you know, there is some transparency about what the cost from the refinery to the dealer is, that there's about 25 cents or so that we don't understand why that charge is there. So there's an upcharge that can't be explained in the marketplace. That could be some price fixing just to gouge consumers. Yes, of course, California has higher gas tax than other places. That is also true. And we also have a carbon dependent economy where we're all stuck in our cars. We just are. And I take the ferry to San Francisco 3 days a week, and I love it. I absolutely love it. But we are really a car-based economy. Kids to school, kids to, you know, going to work. I mean, to get anywhere in Marin by mass transit, you have to plan ahead, and you have to suck a lot of your hours into that journey. And there are people that are dependent on that, and they have to plan their entire day around that. But most people in Marin have the privilege of not doing that, and that requires using gas mostly. Of course, there's a movement towards electric, but we're not pricing carbon appropriately. The harm and damage of carbon to the environment is far more than what we pay to alleviate that harm. And in fact, when we spend money on gas, we spend no money for alleviating harm. The gas taxes are essentially for road maintenance and repair. So we're not pricing in how do we reverse the harm we're doing as we're driving cars. So that's a long answer that doesn't fully explain this for people, but it just goes back to the fact that we're probably underpricing what gas should be. And the state is about to sue the oil industry because they've known for 50 years about the harm that it is causing.
All right. Thank you very much. I'd like to open it up for other questions now.
Yeah.
That would be great.
Yeah, in fact, back to the mystery surcharge I mentioned.
Oh, yes.
I wrote a letter to then Attorney General Javier Becerra, the Secretary of Health and Human Services for President Biden, asking him to investigate it. That investigation is ongoing. Attorney General Bonta is continuing that investigation. I shared with the Attorney General, the current one, that I had concerns about whether there was merit in the investigation, like not merit, but like, could we really find this out? And he had shared with me that they're continuing to do this work, doing their due diligence, that he believes that there's credibility in continuing that investigation.
Okay. Luann has her hand up there. So Luann, if you want to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question.
Great. Thank you, Mark, very much for being here. You know, what crosses my mind is just a couple of parts to this question, but it's very brief. You know, we know here in Marin County, you know, that 25% of us are over 60.
Mhm.
I'm just curious, in California as a whole, do we know what percentage is over 60? And I ask that just because it makes a difference as to how much attention, you know, this demographic is paid, knowing, you know, what percentage of California might be similar to Marin County or not. But the question actually is too, are there things going on that impact our demographic that maybe we don't know about? Things that we can fight for or get engaged or get letters that maybe, you know, go on in your world before you retired, you know, that we don't even know impact us. Anything in particular that occurs to you? I would be just curious. And does civic engagement work? You know, would our voice mean anything anyway?
So for me, it worked. And I think it worked very effectively working with our Commission on Aging in Marin. I loved working with them. I served on the Aging and Long-Term Care Committee early in my legislative career for just a couple of years, but it helped me focus in. What we're seeing in Marin is going to follow on in other counties across the state. We're not by per capita the oldest county, but we're close to it. I think there's maybe 3 or 4 that might be a little bit older than Marin, but it's going to be a wave. And they actually give a name to it that I don't think is very effective in promoting policy. They call it the silver tsunami.
Yeah.
And so that didn't, to me, compel good policy from getting made. It was felt like a novelty to talk about it that way. But there is a statewide effort to do kind of a master plan on how do we deal with this aging population. I do believe we are, you know, maybe 5 or 10 years delayed from when we should have had that done. For me personally, working with local seniors in Marin, I'll just mention 2 bills of the 95 that became law that I really enjoyed working on. The first was helping people upgrade their home to allow them to age in place. So for example, you know, grab bars, things like that, anything that needs to be done to do that for the home to make it safe, that local jurisdictions waive permit fees for those types of investments. And so I passed a law for that. Also, a lot of seniors are criticized for their driving. Have you guys ever heard that before? So what I passed a law that's really for everybody that recognizes what impairs driving. And so medicine impairs driving, and many seniors start taking medicine, just like anyone of any age start taking medicine that can impact that driving. But often, so I passed the law, you guys, you get your medicine, it will often have a warning saying, you know, be careful, this may impair driving a vehicle or a vessel. And so, you know, seniors sometimes would take their medication, not recognize that it may impair them. Again, anyone of any age would have that issue. And so that law at least raises awareness of that. So it's not because you're older, it's because you're taking medication you didn't know how it would impact, could impact the patient. And interestingly, because it's not just a senior issue, the CHP, after we introduced the legislation, was for driving a vehicle. The CHP came to me and said, can you add a vessel? They are very concerned about impaired boating. And so that was informative to me about how much more broadly this protects all Californians. I did another law regarding drunk boating or boating under the influence. You don't know when you start doing legislation kind of what rabbit hole you go down, because once you do a bill in a certain subject matter, people start seeing you as like, oh, you're the guy. You're maybe the subject matter expert. You're able to navigate the legislature really effectively on these issues. So the sheriff started saying, okay, well, we've got this other issue in this vein. Let's work with you on this since you get it. And so I really enjoyed working with seniors there. I think more broadly, there needs to be, kind of almost like both a no wrong door way of getting resources and help, plus also like a single door that everyone can go to get resources and help. And, I have aging parents. My mother passed away last month and my father's 90 and in hospice care. And, I'm grateful that we've had the resources to do everything we've been able to do to keep my parents safe during the pandemic. And now as my father requires 24-hour care, but not everyone has that, and it's very scary. And we need to help people with resources and support, particularly as the number of people impacted by this will be much larger.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah. Thanks for the question.
Oh, Marion, your question.
First, Mark, I'd like to thank you for your service.
Thank you.
I'm one of your great fans, and I like what you're doing now.
Well, thank you.
Talk about how we could join in that. But my biggest question is the homeless, and acknowledging the severe mental illness that many of them have, and the severe drug problems, and just that nobody seems to move forward to do anything except we'll put them in a hotel or we'll do this, and not acknowledging that they have severe problems. So I was wondering if you could talk about that and what California is doing. It's just terrific.
Yeah, so thank you. There's a lot going on, and Governor Newsom in his State of the State, I think it was in 2020, said he basically dedicated his entire State of the State address to the issue of homelessness, which I said, that's fantastic, because to have singular focus on as big and intractable of an issue as that is what it needs. And then the pandemic happened. But what the administration and the legislature understood was that you can't shelter in place if you don't have shelter. And homeless people, they congregate. They don't just live off on their own like hermits. There's, we see the tent cities and all of that. And so we recognized that, and we started looking at, what are some underutilized motels, and how do we get people inside those rooms? Of course, during the pandemic, most people weren't traveling, so they had a lot of space. And so we were able to start buying those motels all over the place, and being able to say like, okay, you now have a place. But that required also providing some services. You can't just give them a room and leave them be when they have both mental health or addiction issues. So it's how do we provide more holistic care, more wraparound services, case workers, social workers, and so on, treatment. And so they're expanding that, and not fast enough, and not always in a very not in as choreographed a fashion as we would want them with local communities. And I think that we saw that happen in Larkspur with the rehabilitative center that they are rehabbing. It's a rehab center that they have to, I think it's almost about to open if it hadn't already, but they had to like invest in the infrastructure, make it nice. And that the communication with the local community wasn't very strong. Communication with the local jurisdiction wasn't very strong. And that was, I think, not really the state's fault, but really the county's fault in not engaging people in a constructive manner. Sometimes you want to move fast, and then you forget to bring people along with you. And I think that occurred. The other thing, and that we can do better, I think, at the local level, I mean, so much of what the state's doing is empowering locals to do this work, is the care courts, which is a way to engage people that need mental health care and drug treatment, typically homeless people, in getting them that treatment. Marin is on the very end of adoption of that rather than at the front end. There's some benefits, so we can learn from what the other communities are doing. But I want to make sure that they're really prepared for it. I don't think it's going to have as overwhelming we're not going to feel it as a community necessarily, because it's not going to be fast. And so it's going to take time. So I would have liked to have seen a little bit quicker adoption of it and more community communication about it, what it means to the county to have the care courts. So the care courts, that was a law that was passed when I was in the legislature that is now being implemented in counties across the state. We have until the end of 24. I believe that the county plans on starting that off in October of 24. So on the tail end of when it's compelled to continue doing that.
Thank you. Just one quick thing. I was just wondering why we're not focused on opening up mental hospitals and into institutions. Why we're not even thinking about that or going in that direction. Thank you.
Well, there's a very big swing away from that in I believe it was the 60s or 70s. People blame that for creating the crisis that we have now. I'm not sure if that was the cause. I think the lack of other support services was the cause, and that now we're being creative and also investing the money to provide those services. There's a cost to everything, and we want to do all of it as humanely as possible as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions from our audience?
You had a couple in the chat there. Did you see those, Gary?
I did. I don't see them so much as questions, but let me go forward with them. One person said, what's happening with the Richmond Bridge San Rafael bike lane? There's a bike lane on one side. What's happening with that?
So I think it may have been 2015 or so that I got the third lane on the bottom deck going to get traffic out of Marin. It required major investment on the east side of the bridge, where they had to dig into the hillside in Richmond, build a very expensive, elaborate retaining wall to protect the hillside from crumbling into traffic, and also to allow traffic to flow at a quick enough speed where it could see around that hill. So a lot of planning went into that. My legislation required them to speed that up. And so what we're seeing now is something that I always knew was a problem, was the fact that people can't get to Marin. So, when I would go to, say, schools, for example, so many teachers would thank me for getting them home faster, but they weren't able to say, thank you for getting me to work faster. So all of this important infrastructure investment that took place on the eastern side of the bridge as 580 flowed through Richmond has not occurred on the western side in Marin. And Marin has known about this problem. So if anyone ever goes to Larkspur Landing, the ferry terminal at 8 a.m., the backup from 101 to 580 is bumper to bumper. And I think you would say the same thing if you were going from 580 to Central San Rafael and getting off of the Central San Rafael freeway exit. It is backed up. It is a pinch point of pain. And Marin, the Transportation Authority of Marin, has known this. I have told them about this. We have called this out. And the reason why there are two things. One is, they wanted to do a pilot to see how this bike lane was going to be used. The problem is once they open up the bike lane to traffic, the traffic on the Marin side will get exponentially worse because there's no capacity to carry that traffic. It actually makes the traffic flow better on the Marin side to have less, have the traffic get here slower. It sounds awful because it is. And if they had started planning on this a decade ago, we maybe could have gotten to a point where that bike lane is unnecessary. And it certainly is unnecessary on the weekends, when there's just less traffic in general, but that is when maybe bikes would use it more, not the commute hours. So it's a little bit of it's not a chicken or the egg kind of conversation. They've known that they need to do something about it, and they've done nothing.
All right. All right. Also, if you remember, going north, there's still 2 lanes only. So it matches, it fits the pattern there. Do you remember, Mark? Maybe you don't. There was an oil train that went across the Bay Bridge for the longest time until the automotive industry stopped it.
Yeah.
Similarly, how do you get from here to there without being able to walk, if you don't have a car? So those issues are
Across
common.
the Bay Bridge. I mean, the Bay Bridge only has a bike lane for half the bridge.
I know. This went all the way across. It was interesting.
Yeah.
But it was closed down in the 60s or even before then. Okay. Something about, what is it? Sir Francis Drake Boulevard.
Mm-hmm.
What can you tell us about what's going on there for the lighting and the transport? Because that's a major route.
Yeah, so some people may be aware that I had considered running for county supervisor, and I'm not running for county supervisor. After all, I thought about it over the summer, and I enjoyed being an elected official and serving the community. But I've also enjoyed not being in elective office, and know that I can do a lot of good in the role that I'm in now. And so, but I think you've heard me be like a little calling out a couple of the issues that I think the county has had, and missed opportunities on homelessness, and I think mental health that they need to do a good job on going forward. And I would say that Sir Francis Drake is an example of the county's dysfunction and lack of leadership. And I mean, I'm just going to scratch the surface on this. They had a very big plan for redoing Sir Francis Drake, which I consider the major east-west artery of the county. And they had extensive public engagement about how to do it. Whether you agree with it or not, they did have extensive public engagement. And then they went about doing the job, and then they changed the streetlights. And something that was not in any of the public engagement? The streetlights. It was never noticed to anybody that they were going to change the streetlights. And I think what's really damning of the county is that Supervisor Rice did not know they were changing the streetlights. So, this is the issue: is they didn't even tell the supervisor of this major artery that they were making this change. Of course, the public should know, but the staff never bothered to consult the supervisor. That is the least that they should have done in respect for essentially their bosses, and they didn't do it. So this caused a very big problem. People might be like, streetlights, whatever. Well, if you live under the brightness of those lights, it is a very important issue that affects both your mental health and physical health. And so it's very damning. I believe that people at the county should be held accountable for this extraordinarily expensive and very disrespectful snafu, to put it mildly. And it shows that they're not working their hardest on behalf of the people that they represent. The supervisors aren't. As an elected official, I know that staff are well-meaning, good people that want to do their job. But when you are paying attention, they will work a little bit harder to make sure that things are up to snuff for you. And this was clearly an example where they didn't do the bare minimum of at least providing notice to anyone that they were going to be making this change. And leadership needs to change at the Civic Center. And this was going to be an issue that I was going to raise in my campaign. Matthew Heimel has announced that he's going to retire, and that's good. I'm not going to say he's doing a bad job. The fiscal house is in order, but staff don't care to tell the supervisors they're changing lighting on a major street in their district. Clearly there is a problem, and those people need to go. And Matthew Heimel is leaving, and that is good. And for that matter, Supervisor Rice is leaving. At the tail end of people's careers, maybe they pay a little bit less attention. Katie's a nice person. I think she stopped paying attention, and I'm sorry to be so honest.
All right. Thank you, Mark. Could you tell us a little bit now? Let's move forward. Could you tell us a little bit now about your impressions, your focus, and your work moving forward with the Anti-Defamation League? This is in your bailiwick now. What do you foresee happening, and how do you get involved?
Yeah, thank you. So obviously, I'm not raising money for myself politically, but you can always go to adl.org and support the work that ADL does. It is, and you can tell them I sent you. It's amazing. So, we know that hate crimes are rising across both California, but our nation. There is hate speech leads to violence. A lot of these, both anti-Semites and bigots, they actually come from, believe it or not, Marin, one of the leading groups that has been dropping flyers off across the country, but even here in the North Bay, was raised in Novato and lived in Petaluma until just a couple of years ago when they moved to Florida. And so it's something that I had known about and paid attention to, and now I have an opportunity to work with ADL to make sure that we are able to counter that hate. So, for example, I mentioned the toolkits that we have for public bodies. If you have read any of the news recently, a lot of them have been getting, because of the Zoom ability to engage in public meetings, a lot of racism they've been saying during their public comment time. And because of free speech issues, legally, it's very difficult to say you can't speak, even if it's just racist vitriol. And it's abusive to the public, of course, for the poor staff that have to sit through it, which is a trauma for them. And obviously, the threat is, if you just take away this virtual participation, then you're taking away all the public's access to their own government, which is what I think some of these people are actually trying to do. I think we see a lot of extremists across the country that just want government not to work. And that's very sad. So this toolkit is something that I'm offering, ADL has provided, that I'm helping to get the word out to them to help understand how to deal with this. And so it's a little bit of whack-a-mole of going to the different places that are being attacked. I'm trying to go, for example, to the League of Cities or the California State Association of Counties to make this more available. We do programming in schools as well. We have a No Place for Hate program that talks about bigotry and racism in schools. And we're in, I think, 40 different school districts now for this academic year. We should be we just have a new education director. So we're going to be in far more school districts in the Bay Area. And then we also do anti-bias training with law enforcement. It's very important work that we do. So we're trying to help counter all of this. We also have a Center on Extremism that actually tracks and monitors extremism online. And we have a Center for Internet and Society. And just last month, it was this month actually, you may have heard that Elon Musk said that he wants to sue ADL for $22 billion and wants to blame ADL for the fact that he's run Twitter into the ground. They have lost advertisers. ADL had been, up until last month, actually advertising or promoting its tweets on Twitter. So it's kind of interesting to blame ADL for this, but what we had been sharing with people was you might want to be aware that your promoted tweets could be next to swastikas. And do you want that when Elon Musk is allowing, with very little content moderation, this hate to be there? So unlike public comment in public meetings where free speech is protected, that is X's Twitter, X and Twitter, X or Twitter, whatever you call it, is private, and free speech rules don't apply the same way. So they're able to do content moderation. And so ADL does track a lot of that. In particular, a lot of, whether it's offices or schools or places of worship where there have been swatting incidences. So swatting is when you call in a bomb threat or an active shooter call that's not actually occurring. And then of course the SWAT team goes in to save the day, but there's no emergency, no crisis. It's a very bad use of course, public resources to have that type of response. And it's traumatizing to the place that got swatted that way. And so we monitor those activities as well. And we coordinate with law enforcement when we're able to track that thing in a way that's actionable. And for example, on the Zoom bombing of public meetings, which is like a polite way to describe what is occurring, we've been able to figure out who the players are that are coordinating this. They engage in things called chat rooms that we don't know about. I mean, that we wouldn't know, but like there's a website called 4chan where they do communicate, where there's a lot more alt-right extremist activity. You know, it's just not, we don't know the names of these sites because it's not mainstream, but there are places where it's safe, for example, for extremists to go and do their thing, but it's also public at times too. So we're able to help law enforcement understand all of that.
Great, Mark. Oh, good luck on your work.
Yeah, thank you.
Forward.
Thank you.
And a question occurs to me. I'm looking, I don't see any new questions in the chat and nobody has their hands raised. So something occurs to me that after with your talking, it's like, is the work you're doing at all related to our gun violence that we've seen, our mass shootings, getting a sense of if gun violence happens, there's a mass shooting in Parkland, for instance, suddenly we realize that the active shooter has been online with hate speech and proclamations and telling people what he wants to do, and nobody notices.
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of points in my life that have helped steer me in the work that I do and public service, or the way that in the role that I'm in now, that it's you know, I'm doing good in the world, and that is a motivator for me. And I think that goes back to my upbringing. And I'm grateful to my parents for that, to have a motivation to repair the world. And I think that the mental health space that I worked in the legislature, where I worked on with the county, for example, on mental health crisis legislation, or on suicidal ideation, or on gun violence. And I worked extensively on gun violence, and I authored 3 times a bill to tax guns and ammunition, which this year another member has gotten to the governor's desk, and I'm hopeful that the governor signs it. And it's wonderful for me that my legacy can continue after I left the legislature, that people are still doing bills that I did. And also, we created a commission on the state of hate in California as well during my time in the legislature. So being aware of all of that and seeing the rising incidences of hate, and that, as I mentioned earlier, hate speech does turn to violence, that I'm doing this work isn't surprising to me at all. I think that it was helpful for me to recognize that I wasn't in a rush to run for office again. When I was considering running for supervisor, I was able to take some time over the summer just to see how that sat with me. And that, while I believe the county could use a swift kick in the rear, that's not what's going to bring me joy or impact society in the way that right now I feel that I need to. But I'm always here for our community and our county to share my ideas on how to make things better, but also turn my professional sights onto these societal problems.
All right. in your time in, okay, good luck on that. I think
It's
we're all with
it's
you.
a big
That's why
one.
we're here.
Yeah, thank you. It's a big one. It's hard.
Keep us in the loop, please,
Thank you.
because that's overarching, and it's surrounding the issues enough to make a difference, I think. Now, no more questions have come up except one general one. Again, your time
It's
in
always that last
the
question, Gary. I
know.
gotta go. I don't have any more time.
Okay, it's been fun.
Yeah.
One last thing.
Yeah.
And this could be very easy for you. What your time in the legislature, in the assembly, what were your favorite issues? What were your favorites? What made you want to come into work and work on this bill?
Mhm.
Could you tell us what your favorites were? We've seen some of the negatives.
Yeah.
What were your favorites?
So they always tell you don't fall in love with your bills. Don't fall in love with your legislation, because your heart rises and falls with them just like your kids. And if your bills fail or something happens, you get impacted in a very personal way. And that's why I talked about the pettiness that people engage in. If you don't support their bill, and it's like, well, if you have a policy preference, it's different, or you see the world a different way. That's okay, and you have to accept people for where they come to the issue, even if you don't respect how they got to that point. And so when I look at my own bills, and it's just so hard to say. I think there are kind of two that I think impacted me in a big way. So when Robin Williams died, I learned a lot more about suicide than I had ever known before. And it was a window into mental health that was a very big education for me in my first term. That was a wake-up call. We knew that suicide was a problem. We had kids dying by suicide, in our high schools in Marin at that time. And I didn't know where to go or what to do as a lawmaker. And so I learned a little bit more about suicidal ideation through Robin Williams. And when people said, oh, let's rename the Rainbow Tunnel for Robin Williams, I did that. And so people might think, well, that was kind of fluffy. But it was an entry point and a learning point for me to then do 3 bills on suicidal ideation training for mental health therapists and psychologists. The first time I did it, it was vetoed. It's one of the hardest bills I ever did. Democrats, some didn't vote for it. Some Republicans did. In fact, the floor manager of the bill who presented it in the Senate was a Republican, because he had a community member whose daughter died by suicide. And one of my strategies as a lawmaker was, how do I get the most votes? Just like as a politician, how do you get the most votes? And I thought, well, if I have a Republican floor manager, maybe I'll get some of his colleagues too, that will help me offset any Democratic losses that I was having, and I'll tell you why. The California Board of Psychology that licensed psychologists was against it. The California Board that licenses mental health therapists was against it. And then their membership associations were against it. But I got the bill to Governor Brown, and then Governor Brown vetoed it, requiring training in suicidal ideation. And I was devastated. And so it was very hard, but it needed to be done. And I had to take a break from the bill. It was very hard to do. And a year later, the licensing board for psychologists, who by far are the highest trained in this space, said, Mark, we actually want you to do that bill again, but just do it for psychologists. Leave the mental health therapists out of it, so we have a better chance of the governor signing it. So I did it seniorly for psychologists, and then the governor signed it. It was still very hard to do. The year after that, then the board that licenses behavioral therapists came to me and said, oh, we want that too. Okay, we won 3 years ago, but we think you're right, and we want to do it too. We want to require this of the people we license. Now, their membership association still opposed it. No one likes regulation or being required to do anything. But the licensing boards saw value in it and understood it. And so we were able to get my original bill into law, but in 2 subsequent bills. And that was a really big journey for me, but it all began with the Robin Williams tunnel legislation, where I really understood it better as a person. And when I talked, I gave a floor speech, and we had a consultant in the assembly who helped me with things, with my staff, with some of our work. And I gave a floor speech about Robin Williams dying by suicide. And I talked about mental health, and that dying by suicide is like dying from a heart attack. It's dying from cancer. It's dying from a health-related issue. It's not an act that that person did against themselves or against anybody. And I got an email from this person. I didn't know this about her. And she said, "My father died by suicide. And I never forgave him until you gave that speech."
Oh,
And it's just, those are things where you realize, what you're doing it's so much bigger, and it just moves me, obviously. And so I did a lot more bills in that space, in mental health and others. And so that was really important to me. Another one, we had, and this was occurring, I think that this was really pre-Trump. We had a lot of border immigration issues, and we had a lot of unaccompanied minors that were in California that often were here by themselves because they may be seeking asylum because they were maybe abandoned by their parents, they were abused, or they were neglected. And so they come here, maybe they have an aunt or an uncle, but they get over here. And so you can seek asylum for those reasons, abuse, abandonment, or neglect. And what was happening is that these children were turning 18 before their asylum case was adjudicated. Once they turned 18, they were no longer minors, and they were getting deported. And so there was a federal law that California wasn't using, that used what's called special guard, or created a special guardianship for these children before they turned 18, but that protected them between 18 and 21 to allow their cases to be adjudicated before deportation. And so I authored about 3 or 4 laws to make that effective for our state. We don't really keep data, but it probably protected thousands of children, and I know dozens of them in Marin initially, and told by legal assistants, that legal aid lawyers that did that work. And one of the partner legal aid groups called me and said that they've used it for the first time in California that year. And this was down in Los Angeles. And I think one way or the other, I wanted to meet this boy. Now he was 18. So I guess, man, I wanted to meet him. I wanted to know who I was helping, and who perhaps I was saving from a very bad future. And so I happened to be going to Universal Studios with my kids, and my wife always kind of rolls her eyes about this, but I'm like, "Oh, just drive home." We drove down there, and I'm like, "Drive home without me. I'm gonna stay here for a couple days, meet this kid." And I did. So I think we went to Universal Studios on Saturday, and I stayed. They drove home Sunday, and I stayed that Sunday or Monday or something to meet this kid, this young man. And I arrived at the legal aid clinic, and we were going to go to lunch across the street. And it was hot, and I was kind of on vacation, and I don't remember what I was wearing, but I didn't look like a lawmaker. And he was dressed like he was going to church. I met him. He was in his Sunday best. And so we went to lunch, just literally at a taqueria across the street with his lawyers and him. And I've checked in, to see like how he's doing. Like, I don't know him, but like the lawyers have said he's doing okay since then. And we had a conversation at that lunch. And I talked to him about kind of his journey and like how he got here and why he chose to come. And he talked about how, his parents left him and his brother. His brother left. His brother was older than him. They've been reunited. And he was really on his own and had to fend for himself. And that gangs were trying to recruit him. And he had a choice to make. You either join the gang or you're not protected from the gang. And I asked him, wouldn't things have just been easier to just join the gang? I mean, I'm like this naive guy from Marin, right? I live a very privileged life. I don't know what gang life is. Yeah, of course I see movies, but I mean, I ask essentially, naive is a nice way to say stupid question, and that I asked. And he looked at me and he said, and he's speaking in Spanish, and it's being translated for me. But essentially he said, if I did, I would never be the same again. The things that he would have to do as a gang member, whether you kill someone to be initiated, you harm others, you do drugs, which is what his parents kind of fell down that trap, from my understanding. And that just like really hit me. One, how stupid I was, but two, it was an educational moment. I'm a little hard on myself. It was an educational moment of what he had to go through to save himself from being a very bad person and really losing his soul to do those types of things. And so, as I mentioned, I did follow on legislation to strengthen our ability to protect children like him from deportation when they hit 18. So those things really stay with me, as you can tell.
Oh, amazing. Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much for presenting to us, being here in mind and spirit.
Yeah.
Your words
thank you.
convey that. And you're absolutely right. Be careful what you ask for. The last question, we're over by 10 minutes. I don't think anyone minds. People are very rapt and staying put and attentive to you and to us. And I want to thank everyone for attending today's session, and especially you, Mark, for being so honest with us. You obviously have a lot of people that like you, appreciate you, and wish you well in your future career.
Well, thank you again, Gary, and thank you to all of you for joining me. And again, thank you to Leonard and Nancy and Harvey for making today possible. I'm really grateful for, again, the opportunity to serve you and to continue our relationship as members of the same community. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you very much. It was just great.
Great.
Thank you. Have a wonderful weekend.
All right. Goodbye, Mark. Harvey, thank you for doing the technical hosting.
Sure.
That was great.
All right.
And we are off